I've been recorded before. It is good to be here. It's not my fault that I'm up here. Steve at one of our program committee meetings put my name up, and they voted or something, and anyway, I ended up here. Good to see you. And it's good to see home group members, good to see some visitors. And it's good to see anybody. When you're as old as I am, you're lucky to be seeing. I never thought I'd live to be 86 years old. But here I am, up and about and kicking as high as I can under the circumstances. I see some old friends here for a long, long time. Darryl back there. Him and I and R.G. Smith and his wife and Tom and his wife were in Montreal, Canada in 1985 for an international convention. And I was telling Tom about it a while ago that the hotel was full and they didn't have a room. And a couple from Canada lived a few blocks away. And they put them up in a room for the entire weekend. That's the love of Alcoholics Anonymous. And we really had a nice time up there. We sure did. And I've been in other meetings before, all over the nation and into Canada and Alaska. And everywhere I go, I feel the grace of God, and the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is available for me there, and I'm grateful for it. And I've always tried to be a good example of a guy that's grateful for sobriety as a direct result of the love of God and a program of Alcoholics Anonymous that works if we work it. And I'm grateful that I've been able to do that. Not always perfectly. The book tells me that step one is the only one that we can work perfectly. But I sure can make good progress if we get involved in working the others. I am truly grateful. My sobriety date is February 16th, 1964. And it's only through the grace of God and because of the program that I'm able to stand here tonight sober, somewhat in my right mind, a little bit nervous, my fly is zipped up. I'm okay. I checked that out earlier. I'm going to tell you a little story, though, before it helped me get over my nervousness. A drunk was walking up the street, using all of the sidewalk, one side to the other, one side to the other. He had his overcoat on, had wine in the pocket, and he was just staggering and humming along. And he was going up that sidewalk, and there was a Mayflower truck up there that was moving. People were moving furniture out of a house up on the hill here that didn't have a driveway. And they were coming down that walkway up in the yard, coming down the steps onto the street walkway, putting furniture in the truck. And one man was coming along, had a great big grandfather's clock on his back. And he came down onto the sidewalk, and a drunk run into him, knocked the poor old fella down. And the old man that was knocked down was sitting over there next to the curb. The clock was laying between him and the drunk. Springs was flying out of the clock, glass was on the street, and 6 splinters of wood where the clock fell. And that man looked at the drunk and he said, "You're the drunkest son of a gun I have ever seen in all my life. Why don't you watch where you're going?" And the drunk looked at him and said, you're the stupidest son of a gun I have ever seen. Won't you wear a wristwatch like everybody else?" Okay, I have a question. How many here tonight have 1 year or less sobriety? Look at the hands. I'm truly grateful to see you here at this meeting and in any other meeting with Alcoholics Anonymous. I can assure you that if you get into the program, work the steps, get a sponsor, get a home group, and do what the big book suggests, some of you people will be the leadership in AA on down the road, because it will bring about a change in your life whereby you'll be prepared to carry the message of Alcoholics Anonymous to others. You can count on that. Some may not make it, and we don't know truly what the difference is. Some of us do and some of us don't. But I'm glad that God in His infinite mercy enabled me to grasp onto this thing years and years ago, and I've been able to hang on to it down through the years. I've had some mighty good times in AA and been to a lot of beautiful places, but the place that I ended up at was not so beautiful. I've been an alcoholic, I know, since I was 20 years old, but back then I didn't know it. I absolutely did not know that I was an alcoholic. I knew that after I began drinking, that the drinking became a habit. And over a period of time, that habit became, rather than wanting a drink, I needed a drink. And I had to get it. And my life was messed up in the community before I went into the Army. I was 19 years old when I was drafted in 1953. The Korean War was in progress. And I had gotten my registration card when I was 18, as required by law. And they called me. I didn't volunteer to go, they called me. They sent for me. And I went. I was on the firing range in Fort Jackson, South Carolina, firing the M1 rifle in August of 1953, some 6 weeks after I had gone in. And I had already fired the rifle that morning, and I was pulling targets. And the range officer made an announcement, cease fire, cease fire. And everybody quit firing the weapons and listened. He said he had an important announcement to make. The Koreans had signed a truce. This was the first week or so in August of 1953. The Koreans had signed a truce. They probably knew that I was coming. But anyway, he gave us off, and most of the guys, we didn't get off really until late in the afternoon. Time you clean up equipment, you didn't have much time to be off. But anyway, most of the guys went up to the beer garden and began drinking 3.2 beer. I didn't go. I didn't like beer anyway. I had been drinking a little since I was 17 years old, pouring out a lot of good beer because I didn't like the taste of it. I knew exactly why Budweiser had all those horses around, and I didn't like it. I would pour out beer at a race or a ball game or something so that they would know I was drinking so little. I just did not like it. But in 1953, I had been reassigned to Fort Lee, Virginia, to the quartermaster school. I had a heart murmur at the time, and they would not put me in the infantry. I went into the quartermaster school. And it was in November of that year that I went home to Roxborough, North Carolina, where I was born and raised. I'm not proud of that, but Highway 501 is the best thing that ever come out of Roxborough. Anyway, that's where I went. And that Saturday night, a couple of friends knew I was coming, and they came by and wanted me to go to the dance with them. And I'd been to that dance 2 or 3 times before, but I'm a guy that had never danced. I had never felt like dancing. And I went to that dance with them that Saturday night, and there was a heater back in the corner, big pot-bellied heater, a lot of pot-bellied people there. And I'm standing at the heater, and a lady came up to the window and bought her ticket, and she went around to the door to come in. And I noticed when she got to that door and she started in, there was two humongous protrusions that came in that door a long time before she did. And she started walking across that floor, right toward that heater where I was. And I'm standing at that heater watching other people. That's what I did out in public. I wouldn't start a conversation with you. I felt so inferior, less than, uneducated, backward country. I felt bad about myself. And she started walking over there toward me. I was standing there with that tight Army OD uniform on. I had put little pins on the shoulders to make it a lot dressier. I had the medals on over here. I had earned that afternoon at the PX. I had a flat top haircut about like it is tonight, except it was a different color and a lot thicker. And I'm standing over there with that uniform on, and evidently she was attracted to it. When she started walking across the floor, I had never seen her before in my life, but I recognized her because of things I'd heard. I'd heard some things about her that would curl your hair. And I knew who she was. And she started talking to me, and people began looking that way, and they was whispering to each other and grinning. My buddies was grinning and looking that way. And I didn't know what was funny about it, but I was a little bit embarrassed because I was unaccustomed to communicating with a person who had that type of reputation. And she talked with me a little bit, and they kept looking and whispering. And finally she asked me would I escort her out to the car. Now I thought maybe it was some wolves in the parking lot and she would need an escort, so I agreed. And I went out to the parking lot with her, and she got in that old Chevrolet automobile. She started that motor up after it sputtered a little bit, and she got the radio going. And she reached over there under my knees to the heater button that was up under the glove compartment. You probably know something about them old heater buttons. Anyway, she's got the heater going. And when she come back up in the car, she put her arm around me and started saying some things to me I'd never heard. I fantasized about them, but I'd never heard. And anyway, we sat there a little bit, and I was restless, ill at ease, and discontent. And it wasn't long before she saw she wasn't making much progress. I was so fearful and apprehensive. My experience with women up until that night was about my like being in the Army. I'd fired off a few good rounds, but I'd never been in combat. She saw that she wasn't making much progress. And she reached up under the seat and came out with a pint of white moonshine whiskey. Got 2 cups out of the glove compartment, and she's sitting there holding that whiskey. I'm looking at it, and I'm thinking about what Mom and Dad had told me. My preacher brother had told me, if they ever drink white whiskey and mess with naughty girls, I'd go to hell. And I was thinking about what they had said. I was thinking about what I'd heard about her, about the possibilities of the evening. And I had this battle going on in my head. I got to make a decision. And I was having trouble doing it. And finally I looked at her, she's beautiful. And I looked at them. And them told me to take a drink. And we sat in that car about 40 minutes, 40 minutes really. I had 2 or 3 more cups of that white whiskey. And I went from being 6'2", 140. I slowly evolved to the type of person I had always wanted to be. I was 6'8", 268, tall, dark, handsome, very articulate, knowledgeable. I knew I was going to lay something on her she'd never experienced in all her life. We stayed out there a little bit. She wanted to go on and dance. And I had become a little bit aggressive in that well-lit parking lot, and it was not the place for that kind of activity. Anyway, we went into the dance. That old fiddle and guitar and banjo struck up a tune on that stage. Everybody joined hands. They started running around that room. And she grabbed me by the hand. Out on the floor we went. We circled that room about twice, and I could do-si-do, promenade, lemonade, whatever they was doing, I could do it. And I really learned real quick. Now, when they started that bunny hop, that just come natural. I really got carried away with that bunny hop. In fact, I got so carried away with it that they asked us to leave. I was about ready to leave anyway because somebody had already stepped on my hand. And we left. And I'm not going to tell you what happened out there after that, but about 2:30 Sunday morning, all the fireworks are over. I'm at home in the bed upstairs where I had slept since a kid. And I'm laying there. I don't ever want to sleep again. I just want to relive Saturday night over and over, thinking about every marvelous event that had taken place, how I had grown up and become a man. And I knew that Mom and Dad and my preacher brother had lied to me like dogs, telling me that I'd go to hell if I drank. And I had been in hog heaven on Saturday night. I had enjoyed everything about that night. And I knew that morning at 2:30 that I had found a solution to my problem. A magic ingredient that enabled me to laugh, talk, dance, socialize, and act like other people around me were acting. And I got along quite well doing that for a while. And that drinking, just over a period of time there at Fort Lee, it became a habit, a real strong habit. I learned by going into Richmond, Virginia, to the bars and honky-tonks and dance halls and so forth. I learned up there, and about 3 or 4 or 5 months later, that if I put whiskey into my system on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, didn't matter what night it was, it would have the same magic effect that it had on Saturday night. And that habit that I had eventually became a mental obsession. And I was drinking because I needed a drink, not really because I wanted one. I know that in the early days of my drinking, I was drinking precisely for the effect that Dr. Sitworth talks about. He says the alcoholic drinks because he likes the effect produced by alcohol. And I drank to reach to that little euphoric plateau, just as I had reached that first Thursday night, that first Saturday night. I went in that little magic plateau where I could laugh, talk, dance, socialize. I wasn't drinking to get drunk, but it began to slip up on me a lot of times. And later on in my drinking, after losing jobs, getting caught for driving under the influence numerous times, driving after license revoked, striking police officers, now that's a bad mistake. Bad mistake. You can get your head tore up. I had knots on my knots as a result of that. But anyway, that's a bad mistake. I hope I never have to go through that again. But I was drinking for a different reason in the latter days of my drinking. I wasn't drinking for that little euphoric plateau that I had reached. I was drinking to black out, to pass out, to forget about the trouble I had been in over and over and over again, about the heartbreak and frustration I brought upon my family, about having made so many promises to them that I just couldn't keep because I couldn't stay away from drinking. Once I put one into my system, I was going to hell in a handbasket, and I knew it. But I go ahead and take a chance on it anyway. I put it in there, and I'd end up getting drunk over and over and over again. And I got married. I got out of the Army in 55 and went back in at 56. I went back in the Army for a couple of reasons. The old saying around Roxborough at that time was that children in the back seat can cause accidents. Well, I learned that accidents in the back seat can cause children. And she told my mother about that, and she was lying at the time. She told my mother she was pregnant, and Mama insisted we get married. That was a gentlemanly thing to do, and we got married. 9 days later, I had been in the National Guard since I got out in 55. 9 days later, I went back on active duty. I signed up for Korea, and about 3 months later, I'm on a ship heading to Korea, heading to Yokohama, Japan, and from there to Korea. And I know out on the ocean there, about 8 days out, all the alcohol had gotten out of my system, and I could think clearly. And I got trying to count up all the times I've been in trouble with the police department, the sheriff's department, and the highway patrol, and the jobs that I had lost, and all the things that I had done to cause so much heartbreak and frustration to my family. I got to thinking about that. And I said, well, when I get to Korea, I'll have an equal opportunity to get my life straightened out. Nobody will know me, and I'm going to try and get my life straightened out. I had gone back in with the rank of corporal that I had made in the National Guard, and when I got to Korea, I did not drink. For the next 5.5 months, assigned to Supply Point 39 in Wee John Boot, I soldiered, and I was elected Company Soldier of the Month 5 consecutive times, Battalion Soldier of the Month 3 consecutive times. The company commander really could count on me to be sharp. When he needed a payroll guard, he would always get me to be the guard for him. And he finally put my name up before the promotion board. And on a Saturday morning when I went through the pay line to get paid, he says, congratulations, Sergeant Bryant. And my eyes got big. He said, your orders will be down Monday. Go ahead up to the laundry and have those sergeant stripes sewed on. Boy, I took off up that hill right away. I had those yellow sergeant stripes sewed on, and I was proud of them. I was the youngest sergeant, I'm sure, in the 39th Quartermaster Battalion. And that afternoon late, the sergeants in the company were going down to the 38th Ordnance Club. And when I was coming down from the hill, I'd been up to take a shower and change clothes and put on my new khakis with their sergeant stripes on. They said, come on down to the NCO club. Says, it's your responsibility to buy us some drinks. Says it's customary for that to happen here in Korea. And I said, well, I didn't know that, but I'll be down after I get finished getting dressed. So I went on down to the club a little bit later on and joined up with them, and they were sitting in there drinking the beer, putting their arms around those pretty little Korean girls, holding them close, and putting the quarters in the jukebox, and they had on those mini skirts, and they were cute as dolls. And I'm sitting in there looking at them, and I'm looking at them sergeant stripes, how grateful I am to have been promoted, and I felt so proud of myself for having achieved this so quick. And as I sat there, the illness that I have that I didn't know I had at the time began to talk to me. Says, oh boy, you've been over here 5.5 months now. You haven't had a drink, you haven't had anything. Says, go ahead and have a drink with these boys. I ordered a beer, slowly drank it, nothing happened. So I ordered another beer, slowly drank it, still nothing happened. So since nothing was happening, I decided that maybe I could risk a double shot of old granddad and Coke. So after about 3 or 4 or 5 of those, the bouncers in that club threw me out for being drunk and disorderly. And they threw me right through the screen door. Didn't bother to open it. I busted the screen out when I went through it. Anyway, I don't recall getting back to the barracks that night, but I do recall it on Sunday morning. I was in my NCO room. There was a dresser over here to the right of the bed, and I reached over and got half of a fifth that was sitting there, and I began drinking. Monday morning, came to in that room, reached over on the dresser, and got a half of a different fifth, and I began drinking on Monday morning. It wasn't long after that, about 90 days or 4 months, that I was a corporal again, getting in trouble while I'm drinking. And I made it back to the States in '58. Still with the rank of corporal. I had been very fortunate to get back with that rank. And I was reassigned to Fort Lee, Virginia, again as an instructor in the quartermaster school maintenance department. And I went to work there. And it wasn't long before the mess sergeant was complaining to the company commander about me. I was coming into the mess hall in the morning, and sometimes my head would fall down in the eggs, and I'd wipe the eggs off my face. And then I'd vomit in the floor. And the guys were sissies. They couldn't stand just a little puddle of vomit. And they'd complain to the mess sergeant, and they'd send me back to the company commander again. And then the company commander began sending me to a chaplain for counseling, and that didn't do any good. He sent me to a psychiatrist, and he talked with me for about 6 weeks, and that didn't do any good. I didn't like him anyway. He was a little Jewish fellow with a long crooked nose and a long crooked pipe that was shaped like a commode, and I swear I smelled like one. And I didn't like him, and he smoked that pipe while he was counseling with me. Anyway, I had a side job working as a waiter. I got fired as that waiter because I wanted a job that would give me extra money. And then I signed up for a life-saving course. And another guy and I signed up for us one night when we was drunk. And they selected both of us. And I had a job then working with special services as a lifeguard. I was the skinniest lifeguard they had. And then the NCO club that had fired me, they wanted me to take a job as manager of the NCO club swimming pool. Now, I got that job because I was coming out of a hotel one morning with female, of course, and I looked around, and there was a sergeant that was manager of the NCO club. He was coming out with the secretary. And I said, "Hey, Sarge, how you doing?" Yeah, boy, it really shook him up. He said, "I want to talk with you." He says, "I got a job for you." I said, "Well, you fired me as a waiter." He said, "Well, I got a good job for you now." I said, "I want you to be manager of the NCO club swimming pool." And boy, they were going to pay me $1 an hour for that. And I took that job. And that job enabled me to get another old automobile. Got a Virginia driver's license then. I had already lost my license in North Carolina, the one I had gotten in South Carolina, and now I got one in Virginia. And then shortly thereafter, up in Richmond, Virginia, I was caught for drunken driving and hit and run. While that case was being appealed from low court into high court, I was caught in Colonial Heights on 7 more charges: driving after license revoked, resisting arrest, striking police officers, all that good stuff, that minor stuff. And the attorney general that was to try those, prosecuting attorney that was to try those cases, told to come to command. Says, in all probability, if he's found guilty on any of those charges, he'll be going to jail. And he come to command and said, let me take action first. And he come to command and put my record for the past 2 years before a board of 12 officers who declared I had become alcoholically unfit for military service. And they gave me not a dishonorable discharge, but an undesirable discharge because of my drinking habits and being alcoholically unfit for military service. And I got out of jail. I got out of the Army. The next day I went to court, and that's when I was sentenced to 90 days in the Petersburg City Jail and a $575 fine. I got out in 57 days because of shoveling snow, working in the judge's chamber, frying salted herrings for breakfast, and such things as that. I'd do any kind of work just to get out quick. And Ruth, my girlfriend, she was only 19 or 20 years older than I, and she reminded me a great deal of a 39 Ford with half of the grill missing. She could smile, and you see that everything this way was gone. And she was up there to get me out that morning. And she was out there in the parking lot with that old dilapidated Pontiac and 5 grandkids in the back seat. And when I came out of jail that morning, she got out of the car and come around to the trunk. And when I got to the trunk, I told her, I said, Ruth, I'll never go to another jail as long as I live. And she said, let's drink to it. She reached in her shoulder bag and got a pint, and I hadn't seen one in 57 days. I broke a seal on it, Jesse, toasted that jail, and down it went. A couple of good swigs. I handed it to her. She spit her snuff out, and she took a drink. Now, I lived with her for a year up there. I had several jobs. I lost every one of them. But she had a good Social Security check coming in from her husband, who was deceased, and she worked in the cigarette factory. I had met her in the NCO club, and she was sitting across from me one night, and she broke a $20 bill and started buying mixed drinks. And I didn't have any cash. I had a coupon book. You could use that to buy beer with, but you couldn't get mixed drinks. Well, she started buying me mixed drinks, and I was attracted to that. Anyway, we started dating, if you want to call it dating, and I lived up there for a year. The longest time I worked was with a tank and iron company, painting and pound water tanks out of town. And I'd come home with some money sometimes on weekends, and she'd steal from me, and we'd get in a fight. And sometimes we'd come home, I didn't have any money, I'd steal from her, and we'd get in another fight. It was real interesting, a good relationship we had going. And I called the law on her, she called the law on me, and sometimes the neighbors called the law on both of us. We had it going on. And finally, Mom and Dad, some way, found out where I was. I had not been communicating with them for a year. I didn't make any phone calls, didn't write any letters, didn't tell them that I was out of the Army. Of course, wife number one found out I was out of the Army because that check quit coming in every month. And they found out it that way. But anyway, that check was going in, and she got angry. And I stayed up there. I had been up there for a year. And when Mom and Dad found out where I was, they wanted me to come home. And I went out to US 1, hitchhiking back home to Roxborough. Moved in with Mom and Dad with just what I had on. All my worldly possessions was in a little Etowah bag. Toothbrush, razor, some soap, washcloth, such as that. No underwear, no t-shirts, no other clothing whatsoever. I moved in with Mom and Dad, and they says no drinking. If you start drinking, you're out of here. And I knew they meant business. And for the next, again, here was 5.5 months of dryness, no drinking. My cousin that I had been working for and fired by him back in '55 when I got out, he gave me a job in the mill because he felt sorry for Mom and Dad and me living there. He gave me a job in the mill, and I began working there, and got along well, 5.5 months. Staying with Mom and Dad, not running around with anybody to drink. Going to church with them. And they introduced me to a lady that was 8 years older than I. And I'd go with her to church and go with her home sometimes and stay around there and take care of things that a good Baptist teacher needs taken care of. And she apparently liked my services. And after 5.5 months, she asked me to marry her. I got to thinking about that thing. It was no big decision to make. She had a nice car, good job. She was respectable, Sunday school teacher, house, 13 acres of land. I had 2 pair of pants and 2 shirts, and it ain't no bad deal. She thought she had me saved, and we got married. And Baptists around home don't dance. That's a sin. You go to hell if you dance. Smoke a cigarette. A woman put on a bathing suit. She's going to get a double dose of hellfire and damnation. Anyway, Sue was a Baptist Sunday school teacher, but she loved to dance, and she was a good dancer. And she wanted me to go with her to that dance, and we went to that dance, and it was totally different from what I expected. I didn't see any other Baptists there. They don't dance. They wouldn't even have sex standing up. They was afraid somebody would think they was dancing. And we went to that dance that night, and I got up with Sue, and I couldn't dance. The music just didn't sound right. And she wanted a dozy, I wanted a doze. She wanted a promenade, I wanted a lemonade or something. I couldn't do it. And her friend asked her to go with her to the restaurant. Well, that friend's husband worked with me in the mill. And he passed a glass of Old Granddad across the table to me, and I hadn't drank any in 5 months. I think I gulped it down about 2 swallows. And anyway, when she got back to the table, I was ready to dance. And we danced, and I enjoyed a couple of numbers with them. But when the dance was over that night, they had to wake me up at the back of the room. I had passed out at the table. And Sue went out the door crying that night, and I went out the door vomiting and cursing. And I put her through a lot of hell for the next year and something. A little over a year. And many times in 1962, I tried to quit drinking. I could go a day or two, and that would be it. And I'd go right back to drinking again, over and over and over again. My money was being spent on child support for my daughter, for white moonshine whiskey for the most part. I didn't drink very much of that government liquor at that time because the ABC store just had been approved to operate there in Roxborough. And we had to go to Durham County or Castle County if we bought government whiskey. Anyway, I drank a lot of white whiskey. I had a scar up here on my nose now from turning up those fruit jars. And it would do the job. I mean, it did just as good as the other, just puts you in orbit. Bill Wilson talks about being rocketed into another existence. So I'll tell you one thing, that white lightning will put you into another existence too. And I went there many, many times. And Didn't get on no rocket ship to go either. I went through that fruit jar. And anyway, I tried many times to quit drinking. And she cried over me and prayed over me, and the preacher cried over me and prayed over me. And one morning, I woke up at Mama's house. My wife, number 2, and I had married. I was living with her, and I got drunk, but I didn't go to her house that night. I went home to where Mama and Daddy was, and I went into their house and went upstairs and went to bed. And the next morning I come to, it took me a little bit to realize where I was. Anyway, I went downstairs, and Mom was in the kitchen, and she saw me coming in, and she had me sit down at the end of the table. She says, I'm going to fix you up some bacon and eggs. I know you feel good this morning. And I can't imagine why I'm feeling so good this morning. I feel like my head's got a drum up in there, and it's beating. My stomach is rolling. I'm cold and hot at the same time. I can't half see. And I said, no, don't fix any bacon and eggs. I don't feel good this morning. She said, oh, but I know you feel good this morning. I can't imagine why I'm supposed to feel so good this morning. And she started fixing those bacon and eggs, and I said, Mom, don't do that. I don't want them. I don't feel like it. And she came over and she said, I know you do. You're supposed to feel good this morning. I said, why am I supposed to feel so good this morning? She said, you got saved this morning, 1:30. And I swear I don't know anything about that whatsoever. But my mother's face just turned white. It really broke her heart. It broke her heart. And my dad carried me over to my wife's house, and I continued to get drunk that day. Anyway, in 1962, I had tried so many times to stop, and I couldn't. And in 63, right after Christmas, I had been drunk for about 3 weeks. And in January, I started drinking on a Friday afternoon when we got off work. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, it was raining. I was doing carpenter work at that time. I started drinking that afternoon. I don't recall getting home Friday night, Saturday night, or Sunday night. Monday morning, wife number 2 was at the house, and she came in and called me about 5:30. Said, are you going to work today? I said, yes, I am. She went back in the kitchen to prepare breakfast, and when I turned to the right that morning to get off the bed, my elbow hit something on the pillow. It was hard and made a clanging noise. And I raised up that pillow not knowing what to expect. There was 2 pints of white whiskey on that pillow. And I began drinking that whiskey that Monday morning. She came back into the room a few minutes later to see why I wasn't in the kitchen for breakfast. And she walked up in front of me when she saw what I was doing, and she began to speak with more authority than she had spoken with all year long. This time I knew she meant business. And she was telling me I was a sorry, no good, low-down drunk. No good to my daughter by my first wife. No good to her, no good to my employees, no good to my parents, no good to anything other than to get drunk. And she said, I'm going to work this morning, and when I get home, I want you out of my house and out of my heart forever. And she went on to work that morning. And I don't recall leaving home that morning. But I did leave home that morning. I learned later from some folks and by reading the paper that I had gone down to the beer bootleg joint. They called a taxi and went to town, and I don't recall being in town. Sometime later, I'm standing in the courtroom in Roxborough, North Carolina, February 11th of 1963. I had been arrested on January 21st. I'm in that courtroom, and the judge is in there, and he is asking the sheriff to present the evidence because I had been on a blackout, and I don't recall what went on that afternoon. And the judge stood up, the sheriff stood up, and he said, I was in my office on Monday afternoon of that date, and he said, I have a telephone call. He said, I had already looked out the window and I saw Wallace on the street drunk, and I was going out to arrest him. The telephone rang and my secretary was not working, and I went across the room to answer the phone, and I talked on the phone for about a minute. I came back to the window and the door there to see where he was, and I didn't see him. And says I forgot about it because it was extremely cold, and I've wished a million times that he had arrested me that Monday afternoon, because within the next 2 hours that's when offenses were committed that brought about my arrest the next morning on January 21st, and I went to jail. When I was tried, the judge told me to stand after he listened to the evidence by the sheriff. The lawyer Mom and Dad had hired could not defend me because of my having been on a blackout. And I was sentenced to 40 years plus natural life at the expiration. 2 days later, I was handcuffed and shackled between two other people, taken into the walls of Central Prison. When I got in Central Prison that afternoon, the sergeant in a bulletproof cage over in the right-hand corner pulled a lever, and a door slid closed on my right-hand side. That's the most gosh-awful sound I'd ever heard in all my life. I had never been in prison. I'd been in jail, but I should have been frightened, but I wasn't. When that door slammed shut, a feeling of relief completely enshrouded my body. I knew I was exactly where I belonged. I had lost my right to live in a free society. A few days later, about 10 days later, I'm in a classification trial to see where I would spend my time. The associate warden looked at that paper and saw that commitment paper. And he said, young man, if you have any idea of ever walking out of here, out of Central Prison, you're going to have to be a good boy. And I was going to be a good boy. I knew I didn't like that place. I didn't like the noise, the confusion, the food, the clothing. I didn't like the other inmates. I was mad with God, mad with my people, mad with the judge, mad with everybody, mad with myself. And I was given a good job in the classification section because I was a good typist. And some 3 weeks later or so, the inmates in there took me into their confidence and told me how that some things was being smuggled in, and that I could get the alcohol that was being smuggled out of the prison hospital. And I began getting that stuff, and I began drinking it. I began getting drunk. And it's bad when you start getting locked up while you're locked up. And that began to happen to me. And in June of that year, 3 things happened that I'll never forget. One of them, I was fired from that job. They didn't send me home, though. My wife went home from work, wife number 2, and a guy was in the house waiting on her when she got home. She was assaulted and robbed and kidnapped. Another thing that happened in that June is that I went with a guy to a crazy meeting they had called Alcoholics Anonymous. And I went with that guy and I sat down on the back row. And for the next 8 months, I was attending that meeting. sitting on the back row, not doing anything. Sometimes going up to the water cooler, getting some water, taking a capsule, get back to the cell block, drinking some alcohol that had been smuggled from the hospital, still getting drunk. And that went on, off and on for the next 8 months. I was sitting in the back row of that AA group doing nothing. And I can assure you that if you sit in the back row of an AA meeting and don't do nothing, ain't nothing going to happen. I know that beyond a shadow of a doubt from self-experience. And I sat back there for 8 months. The free people would come in, talk about love, talk about sharing, giving. And they now and then they'd mention to an inmate, I love you, buddy, I love you. And I knew it was love already there because two jokers on the back row was holding hands every week. And I didn't want no part of it. And I didn't get involved until February 16th, 1964. I'm writing a letter to my mother in the library. And a guy came in and he put a couple of things down on the table and I took them. And within 20 minutes' time, completing that letter to Mom was no longer important. I tore it to shreds and went out on the yard down to the right-hand side of the chapel and dug into the dirt where I had some things buried there, some plastic dollars, yellow plastic dollars that was money in the prison system. And I dug that up and I went to the bootlegger and got some things and went back to my cell block. And in that cell block, I proceeded to get drunk as quick as I could. I come to that night sometime after 8 o'clock. And I'm up on the 4th floor in a two-man cell, 40 feet up. And I took a look at where I was in life. No hope of ever getting out. I had no future. I was a hopeless, helpless drunk. Couldn't get as drunk as I wanted to get drunk and stay drunk for as long as I wanted to stay drunk. And I couldn't get sober because I did not have a program of recovery. And I had been entertaining the idea of suicide for several weeks. And I made up my mind tonight. I got enough stuff under my pillow that would give me the nerve to do it. I took everything that I had and drank that last bottle of alcohol and stood at the door, knowing that door will open at 9 o'clock. And you could see I didn't go over. That night, sometime around 9 o'clock is when I was standing at that door waiting for it to slide open. It would open every night at 9 for guys to go back in if they didn't want to watch television until 11. That night I stood at that door crying and praying. And you can call it sickness, blacking out, passing out, whatever you want to call it. But I choose to believe that a loving God in His infinite mercy gave this sick, hopeless, helpless drunk one last reprieve. I came to on my knees at the commode, and I vomited in that commode, and I'm crying and praying, and I pass out again, and sometime later, I come to and crawl in my bed, and when I went out the door the next morning, about 5:30, when the guard came around to see that we were getting ready for breakfast, when I went out the door the next morning, inmates on the right and on the left said to me, what was going on in there last night? I said, what are you talking about? I had been in that two-man cell alone. My buddy had been in the hospital for a week. I said, what are you talking about? They said, last night you cried out loud enough for everybody on this road to hear you. You said, God, if you help me get back to AA, I'll try. I no more remember saying that or praying that prayer than you do. But I can tell you this, the following Thursday night, when I went back to the AA group, I didn't sit down on the back row. I went up to the left side of the podium and sat down in that left seat. And that became my seat on Thursday night. There was only one meeting a week at that time at Central Prison, and it was a speaker meeting. And I began attending that meeting. I'd pick up pamphlets from the literature rack, carry them to my cell block, and I'd read them. And some 2 weeks later, Tom Iverson came to the meeting. Some of you have never met him. Some of you do know him. He's a dear friend of Steve, Jeanette, Darrell, myself, maybe some others in here that do it. Anyway, he came to the meeting. He had other prison groups that he was working with. And I talked with him after that meeting that night, and he reached over on the literature rack and got a copy of the Alcoholics Anonymous and gave it to me and told me what to do with it. And I took it to my cell block and I began to read it and I began to study it. And I got active in the group. A year and a half later, I went back to Tom and talked with him. I knew I didn't have the quality of sobriety that some people had who were coming in there. And Tom told me, he says, you get in that book again and you start at step 1 and work every one of the steps. And it says, when you pray that third step prayer, read what it says just below it. Then just below it, it says, next we launched out into a vigorous program of action. And you take that action, whatever it is. And then I made that searching and fearless moral inventory. And when I found out some things about myself, it was absolutely mind-boggling. I had been a sick cookie for many, many years. Sick before I ever went to Alcoholics Anonymous. Sick before I ever took a drink of alcohol. I had been sick even as a kid, and I knew it. And I took that inventory and began looking for someone to take step 5 with. And a couple of 3 weeks later, a Presbyterian minister came in. And within 10 minutes of his talk, I knew this was the man that I'm to take step 5 with. And I sat down that night and took step 5 with him and asked him to become my sponsor. That very same night that Reverend John came into Central Prison, I'm upstairs taking step 5. Reverend John had brought 4 men with him from Greensboro. Tom had told those people that if Alcoholics Anonymous will change a person like Wallace Brown, that we need to give these other guys a chance to get into the big book and to learn how to work, live, and apply the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous in here. And those 4 men began to come in 2 weeks later. And we broke up into 4 groups. We had over 100 people in that group. We'd break up about 25 people to a meeting. And we began studying the book and working the steps. And within a 3 or 4 month period there, we advanced from 1 group a week to 3 meetings a week. We had a unity meeting, a service meeting, and a recovery meeting. And it became one of the best institutional groups I've ever heard of or been involved in. And I tell you, a lot of people found a wonderful way of life. The riot came up in 6 days. I got to quit. Yeah, I'll quit in a minute. I got to quit. But the riot came up and it closed the prison down. And I went to work then as a clerk for the hospital, Dr. Britt. And while I was there for working in a hospital, they came over and got me out of the doctor's office and carried me to the back hall, and I didn't know of any infraction I had broken. And what they were doing was that V. Lee Bounds, the director of prisons, as a result of the work I had been doing in Central Prison in AA, working for Tom as a clerk for the AA group, editor of the story, staff artist for the story, As a result of doing those things, V. Lee Bounds, as a result of Tom's request, gave the people an order. I was not in the honor grade. I was moved from Central Prison out to the honor grade unit to work in the alcoholism program for public drunkenness offenders who were sentenced to 30 days to 6 months. I worked for 2 years there in that program with Tom, and then was sentenced to the Advancement Center. Anyway, after being at the Advancement Center for several years working there, people found out that I was an okay guy, and I had over 500 letters to go in from Sanford area and other people in the state telling Governor Hunt that Wallace has had a wonderful way of life in spite of being in prison and being in the program for 17 years. We would love to have him for a citizen of Lee County. I'm still a citizen of Lee County. Governor Hunt believed those people and commuted that time. And I've had a marvelous way of life ever since I went into in the prison environment, and I became free behind the walls of Central Prison for the first time in my life. I'm still a free man today. And I'll say this and I'll quit. That mom that saw me the first year that I was in prison, small pupils, big pupils, slurred speech, my letter writing, all of that dictated to her that nothing had changed in my life. I was still a practicing alcoholic. And it hurt her. It really hurt her. But I went to her bedside when she was laying in Person County Memorial Hospital in 1971. 56 days earlier, my father had died. I'm at her bedside that day. Bob Gaster from Sanford took me to her bedside. And Mom was crying about a brother of mine that was drunk and knew that she was dying. He wasn't there. But that mom who saw me that first year I was in prison under the influence, when I'd visit, she'd visit with me. She asked me that night, says, will you do me a favor? And you know a guy in prison will promise his dying mother anything, would you? And I said, yeah, Mom, what is it? She said, will you always stay in that AA thing? I said, yeah, Mom, I will. I'm in AA tonight, not because of the promise I made to Mama. I'm in AA tonight because of every promise in the big book Alcoholics Anonymous, page 83 and 84, has been a reality in my life since I was behind the walls of Central Prison. I found a freedom, a happiness, a peace of mind, a way to live and be of maximum service to God and the people about me. I know that I am a recovering alcoholic. My book tells me I have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, but it reminds me that I'm not cured. What I have is a daily reprieve, contingent on the maintenance of my spiritual condition. And I try to do that in this group wherever I go. And I don't say no when I'm asked to speak. I do it. But I never ever volunteer or promote myself to other people in trying to get a speaking engagement. I don't have to. But I have been in demand many, many years now and seen some of the most wonderful places in this world as a direct result of turning my will and life over to the care of God as I understand it. I love my home group. I love you, Pete.